Hey, good evening, everyone. This is the next MFEN lecture of the program. My name is Welsh, and I'm the education lead for FEN. You might have been expecting Jenna McLaren from Cardiff. I'm very sorry, it's entirely my fault. I overloaded Jenna with too many lectures, so I'm picking this one up so that Jenna makes a good job on the next one. Right, so our topic this evening is organising your own workload. Remember, this programme is for people who are managing a section or a shift in an A&E department. Okay, so this evening we are talking about, when I find the right square, we are talking about managing your own workload. Bit difficult, it has to be said, this one. When this thing gets out my way, I shall press the right button. When you're managing when you're working for someone, when you're a staff nurse, it's not too difficult because you're working under someone's direction. But when you first get told you've got to organise yourself, it's a little difficult, especially when you're moving up from being a staff nurse and you know the clinical workload, and then you're put in charge and you're not prepped very far before that has to be done. Now, this is not playing the game. I would love it to just move out my way. Come on, move. Go. Right, let's try this. Let's do that way. Right, that's better. Okay, so usual webinar rules apply, folks. The session is being recorded, and we aim to make the recording available for catch up. That's usually within the week. Susie's very good. She's on to the session the next day, looking at it and making sure it's all correctly recorded. And then once it's all recorded, she goes and uploads it to the website, so it'll then be available for re-watching as many times as you feel the need. In an ideal world, you keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking, but there's not many on the live webinar tonight, so I've asked them to keep their microphones open so that they can talk when they're ready without having to think about it, and they certainly don't need to put up their hands, those of you on the webinar. Chat function is a great way to ask questions if that's what you want to use. That works a treat. If any questions come up, we will answer. I'll answer as I go along, or if I don't know the answer, I'll write it down and make sure I follow it up and post the answer up on the website. If you find you're struggling with reception, turning off your camera helps, and we do ask that you don't share the codes for the MFEN sessions or for the recordings unless you've received permission from FEN to do so. And that's simply because you're paying, or your manager's paying, for this education. It's not there for free. Okay, so learning outcomes for tonight. We need to consider some of the unique elements of the nursing charge role, and I will spend most of the session doing that. We need to apply some evidence to your practice. So as we go through, I will do the applying evidence to each element. There's lots of evidence for each element as we go, whether that be research or that be inspection or that be review evidence. It's just being aware of what best practice is. And something about how we balance clinical care and managerial tasks. Okay, so I want to start with something one of my managers said, and if he ever finds out I've said this, he's going to go bright red, because he's a very modest sort of chap, but an excellent manager. And when asked what's a manager do, he said the job of a manager is to make sure their staff have got everything they need to do their job, and then get out of their way while they do it. And I've never forgotten that. And it's been kind of my watchword as well. And I've gone through thinking, have they got everything they need? Right, now get out of the way and let them get on with it. So What do staff need to do their job? What do our staff need from us? Let's start at the very beginning and all that. Let's start with, what do they need to do their job? So my manager said, make sure your staff have got what they need. What do they need?
Proper training.
They do. That's my third box, and my fourth box. So you'll have to wait for those. But yes, proper training. So they need to be trained to do the job. They absolutely do. Now we could talk. Sorry, Raj.
Being physically, mentally, and emotionally well.
Do you know, I haven't got that on my list. I think we'll park that one, Raj, simply because I know that will come up later in this term for NFEN when we talk about human factors. But you're not wrong. They do need to be fit enough to do the job. It's a physical job, and so they need to be fit enough. But that's probably not something I can give them. I think that's probably something I need to monitor, and I need to watch for, and I need to encourage them to do for themselves, but I probably can't do it for them or give it to them. Anything else they need to do their job?
The right tools and the right environment.
Yep, absolutely. So let me just click on the boxes I've got, and oh, they're all going to come up together. Right, well, that's all right then. So the first thing I thought of was equipment. That you can't do the job without the right equipment, can you? It's absolutely impossible. Don't know if anybody heard the latest evidence from the Manchester Arena inquiry, but there was a nurse interviewed. Do I mean interviewed? What's the right word for when the when you're, a nurse gave evidence, that's the right expression. So a nurse gave evidence to the inquiry, and she was explaining that she had been on her own in a section of the arena with a young girl who has a massive head injury. And this is a nurse who, if you give her the right equipment, could have done quite a lot. Although, to be fair, it was the CT scan later showed it was an unsurvivable head injury. So, you know, maybe in retrospect, but never mind. At the time, the nurse had absolutely no equipment with her. And so her natural instincts to try and grab for the oxygen mask, plug it in, turn on the oxygen, grab for the monitoring equipment, start cutting, putting in an airway, all those sorts of things she didn't have. As she gave her evidence, she said, I had just my own two hands and the knowledge that I'd gained from work. But she was in tears as she was giving the evidence. And that inability to use her knowledge and skill because of lack of equipment clearly really, really distressed her. Now, in the UK, we're pretty, and Ireland and Europe, in fact, and probably the United States par excellence, we are very lucky. We rarely have to do without equipment. But anybody having problems with the blood bottle shortage at the moment?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You having that problem in Northern Ireland?
No.
Oh, well,
but in saying that, I work in pediatrics, and we usually use the wee tiny PEDS bottles. So
yeah, it's the bottles that's the problem. So I don't know who manufactures the PEDS bottles and whether we have the same problem with the PEDS bottles. I know we had some direction at work about how we were to do PEDS and everything, but how's it going in Wales? The shortage of bottles, and you've got rationing of which blood tests you can do, and think about it before you do it, and more tests on the one sample, that sort of thing going on.
Yes, that's right. It's going on still.
So there's a problem because a factory that made them is no longer. So as soon as you have a problem with the supply, you don't have enough equipment, and you have to kind of reprioritize and think about how to do that. But if you can imagine not having monitoring equipment, so can you imagine for a moment not having an ECG machine? Why might you not have an ECG machine, for example?
So if they weren't being maintained, and
Absolutely. Absolutely right. If you've got all your ECG machines down in medical engineering, because I don't know, mixture of poor maintenance schedules and a patient who decided that their intoxication or their entitlement or whatever it was meant that they could take it out on your ECG machine and it's been totaled. That's crippling for an adult area of an ED, isn't it? Because even if you cut down the number of ECGs you need from the just in case ones to no, they really do have central crossing chest pain, that's a heck of a lot of difficulty to manage that. What about if I make it less complicated, perhaps, and I say, actually, Kate, let's say instead we're out of IV pumps. How much difficulty does that cause you?
huge difficulty with fluids in children. Yeah.
You can't do it, can you?
No, you can't give. No.
You're stuffed. Now, if you're long in the tooth and you happen to have a lot of stock sort of tucked away up a corner, you might find the odd IV burette set, but it's unlikely. But without an IV pump, you are going to be completely and utterly stuffed.
Yeah.
In adults, you could just about get away with it, but it's far from ideal. Far from ideal. And if you put fluid up, you're going to have to watch the flipping thing like a hawk. What's your alternative if you don't have IV pumps?
In adults, we can give according to the calculation of the fluids and time. In adults,
Yes, you could do the old drip rate calculation, yeah. But you know as well as I do that veins haven't read the drip rate calculation, have they? And some veins go at the speed they're supposed to, and other veins just seem to drink the IV fluid. Is there anything else you could do?
I suppose you just have to give it if you really didn't have a pump, you'd have to give it slowly each hour, which would be very, very time consuming.
Wouldn't it just? Don't we rely on our kit? It'd be very time consuming, but we're thinking out of the box a little bit, but you could if you had to give however much it was an hour in the hour, that could be done. And then stop the drip. But it would be a bit of a guesstimate, especially if you're doing something like 26 mils an hour out of a 1 litre fluid bag. That's going to be a bit of a guess. The other thing you could do is just kind of go, do you know what, forget it, they'll have to drink. That won't do for certain patients, but it might do for some. It might throw you back on. So we need equipment to do the job. Otherwise, you can feel how we're trying to grasp at what could we do instead. I also thought you need an adequate supply of consumables. You know, it's no good asking me to do plasters on a patient, on a pile of patients, if I've got no plaster. It's a no-can-do situation. So if I don't have, let's say I don't have any more plaster slab, what am I going to do? Stumped you all.
apply
Devise some sort of splint.
Yeah, so you might be able to do splinting. So if it was an undisplaced fracture, maybe of the forearm, you could use a Futura style splint or a gauntlet splint, depending on the nature of the break and what you've got in the cupboard. But that's not going to cut it for a collies because it'll slip. It's not going to cut it for an ankle, but you know, might have enough ankle boots. But you can feel as soon as I start going down each of those lines, and then if my next question to you is, what if we don't have that? What if we don't have that? So you can see that as a member of staff, you need enough kit and you need enough consumables. And then you're absolutely right to say they need enough training to do the job. So they need enough knowledge of what they're dealing with in the area they're working to not be dangerous and be able to do the direct patient care. They need enough skill to manage the patient group they're with and to do the direct patient care. And then I was thinking, what else do I need when I go to work? Aha, I need a uniform, I need adequate shoes, and I need PPE. Particularly in the current climate, I probably wouldn't have thought of PPE before COVID. I would have just thought, oh yeah, well, apron and gloves, yeah, right. But actually it's a little bit more nuanced now, isn't it? So have we got enough of everything? So you can see in just quite a quick chat, if we don't have enough of all of those, the staff can't get on with their job. So part of your job is to make sure they've got all that so they can do their job. Okay, so there's something also in what my old boss said about how you do all that. And the things that staff usually need are these. Now, this is where we get into a bit of evidence base. I took the time and trouble for doing this session to go through 3 years worth of emergency nursing journals. I won't tell you which ones because that's not fair on them. And I didn't find a single article about leading a shift, or leading a section, or how to be in charge. I found lots and lots and lots of articles about clinical stuff. I found various news items. I found stuff about workload dependencies. I found political statements and news items about let's not do overcrowding again, but I didn't get anything about how to lead a department and do it well for your shift, how to do your workload. So this is about the tone of it, not necessarily how you manage each individual component, but the tone. So I'm going to throw you back to some research done a long time ago now by a lady called Lynn Sabay. Now, Lynn Sabay did a doctoral study, and she talked about the shape of a shift in an emergency department. She did an phenomenological study. I don't know. I forget. It was one of those sort of long word methodologies. But it was fascinating. She did a lot of interviews with people in the emergency departments, inquiring about workload and how work was done. And the things that were really, really valued in good shift leaders were these. Staff liked people who were consistent. So, you know how you talk about people blowing hot and cold, and that's not usually seen as positive. It's usually, oh, great, it's Jeanette on today. I wonder what mood she's going to be in. When what you really want from the boss that day is, great, it's Jeanette, it'll be all right. So you want someone you can anticipate will be consistent, and someone you can predict what they're going to say. So another finding in Lynn Sabay's work was about how it's so much better if the staff can predict what your reaction will be, and therefore they just then carry it out. So if they know that you will take them seriously and you will either offer advice, or you will take them seriously and you will escalate their concerns, or you will do something about it yourself, then they trust you because your reactions are predictable. So it's something you have to practice to get right, but you can't afford, when you're in charge, to be going off at half cock. You have to be as even emotionally as you can manage, and you have to be quite cool-headed. Really, really difficult when you first start out. But you can all think of someone you worked with who was the most unpredictable, inconsistent, second guess them all the time person. And that wasn't an exciting shift. That was a stressful shift when you had to work for them. Staff like direction. They like to be clear what you want from them and in what time frame. So I need you to go and work in such and such. I need you to take complete care of all of those patients. So I don't know, cubicles 9 to 11. Those are your patients. I need you to be in charge of those patients. I need you to be on top of everything, risk assessments, pain relief, observations, and I need you to let me know a progress report every hour. That's direction. And I know that Ruth is going to talk to you about organising the work of others in a fortnight. So no doubt Ruth will be talking about how you give direction to staff and how you frame that so that they're quite clear. My staff always know where I'm at because I always say things like, your patient, let me know if there's something I need to do. So we'll have that briefing, and maybe we've got 2 or 3 staff the patient could go to, and I will pick one and say, your patient, you sort it, you do all the background work, let me know when I need to know something. And my staff know me well enough to know what I like to know because we've been through that quite a long time. The other thing that's really important is expert clinical advice. Now, I don't know how you guys have felt when you're working for someone who doesn't know more than you, but it can be a bit insecure. When you're in an A&E department and you're a new staff nurse, in fact, any clinical area, and you're a new staff nurse, you think you don't know much, or possibly you're a little bit cocky and you think you know quite a lot, and then you come unstuck and you really rely on the people who are older and more experienced than you. And the person you naturally look to is the person in charge of your section or your shift. And you're expecting them to be able to give you sound clinical advice. And this is where it's really important. And it's very, very frustrating for people who really want a band 6, a CNM1, CNM1, always get it back to front. Anyway, a clinical nurse manager role, or you want to be promoted. You go, do you know what? I'm really good at my job. I deserve the next grade up. Well, it's a different job. So it's not about giving you the next grade up as a reward for being good at your current job. However, if you haven't had enough experience in the staff nurse, the direct clinical caregiver role, then it becomes really, really difficult to advise more junior staff. And then again, you end up in this difficult cycle where you don't gain respect. And then probably the most important thing that Lynn Sabay found, and this is why she called it shape, was that the people who were really good shift leaders had a really clear idea of their goal. So they had an idea. She called it shape because she thought about the shape of the shift and how the shift starts and how it progresses and what kind of crescendos or ebbs and flows and where we were going to. And with emergency care, it's kind of good because the goal is we get everybody through in a nice orderly fashion by the 4-hour target. Now, we can debate as long as you like the difficulties of achieving that and how we perhaps wouldn't want to be doing that for every patient. But I worked before the 4-hour target, and before the 4-hour target, I came back 3 shifts on the trot to some of the same patients, which is grim. That very rarely happens these days. So not funny, but if your goal is let's get everybody sorted, packaged, and good to go within the 4 hours, then you have a shape to your work and everybody can follow that. So those are the things that Lynn really found were beneficial in a shift leader. And so that's your How are you going to do it? What is your kind of attitude going to be to leading the shift? Okay, so answers on a postcard. What is your section leader workload? So these are a couple of colleagues of mine, lucky them. Pictures in the public domain because we used these on Twitter for A&E Live some time ago, so permissions all granted and what have you. So these are section leading at the time. They're looking far too happy to be at work, but bless them, they did smile for the camera. So while you're otherwise distracted, what does a section leader need to do? And I'm thinking here, folks, of nurse in charge in minors, nurse in charge in peds in a mixed department, nurse in charge in resus. So you're not looking after the whole department, you're only looking after a section of it. What do you think the section leader needs to do?
I think that while you are in charge of that section, you still need to know to a certain extent what's going on in the rest of the department and liaise with the other nurses in charge.
Absolutely. Make sure that the shift leader for the overall shift is aware of what's going on in your section. Yep.
Yeah.
Structure the workload.
Yes. So you've just listened to me and you've thought, oh, how can I structure the workload? Yes, you perhaps need to structure the workload so that staff are very, very clear what's required of them. How could you structure the workload?
As a team, like if in one area, like in minor injury, if you're working in minor injury, you can allocate the triage nurse and then treatment nurse who can do the plastering and all. And some of them cannot do the IVs and all, so you can prioritize them to do their treatments.
So I've got a box for that in a minute, Raj. That's great. We'll talk our way through those boxes. Anything else the section leader needs to do?
Delegate roles to different staff.
Allocate roles.
Building great working relationship with the team.
Yeah, working relationships, but kind of it's always good to build working relationships. That's not something that's particular to the section leader.
Ensuring that they have enough staff to manage the area.
Maybe. I would say that's probably more of a shift leader thing, because the shift leader is required to give the section enough staff, aren't they? Rather than, you know, obviously as a section leader, if you've got a problem, you're going to go to the shift leader, but you know, maybe the amount of staff you've got is a shift leader issue. Okay, I came up with quite a lot. Oops, they're all going to come up separately, so let's just go back. Right, so for some reason I don't understand, my 9th box has come up first on my animation, so never mind, we'll go with that first. So whilst you might have allocated your staff out to do something else, actually within the section you need to know your stock levels are adequate. So going back to our previous discussion about what do the staff need to do their job, have you got enough consumables, drugs, fluids, medical devices? Do you know where they all are? Do you know where to get more if you need them? Do you know who to task with getting more if you need them? Now, most departments have a bit of a stocking up thing going on. When do you do your stocking up? When does that happen and who does it?
As soon as we start the shift, one of the staff will be allocated. The healthcare support worker will stock up all the things.
Okay, so you allocate to an HCA to go and stock up, and is that something HCAs are taught to do, or do they just know how to do it, or do you give them direction on it?
No, they know how to do it. They were taught to do it because they worked there for years and years. So,
Okay. So you're in the lucky situation that your HCAs know exactly what they're doing, and they don't actually have to be told. They just go to the area and start stocking up.
yeah.
So that's great,
Mm.
because different areas require different stock levels, don't they, of different things. You don't usually stock boxes of plaster in resus. If you need plaster in resus, you bring it in, but normally you don't stock it there. Equally, you don't stock A lines in minors. So there's that having the right stock in the right area and making sure your healthcare assistant is on it. Some departments employ housekeeping staff at a lower level than a healthcare assistant. So depending on the way your grading system works, you may find that you've got some lower grade workers who are housekeepers, and their job is to stock up and make sure that stock levels are always there, and they never actually get involved in patient care. Their job is to sort out the stock and make sure medical devices are cleaned down and make sure cubicles are cleaned down, what have you. Okay, next thing. So it might sound really obvious, but you need to take handover from the section leader on the previous shift. Okay, so you're going to be picking up not just what patients have you got in that area, but any issues that have arisen in that area. I don't know, the blood fridge has been playing up. You need to give it a good bang, and can you report it to estates so that they can come and have a look, and transfusion so that they know, or the blood fridge won't open. I haven't said anything to transfusion yet because I only just found it out when I went to do the checks. So if you could report that. So those sorts of issues, as well as patients, need to be really robustly handed over. Otherwise, you're going to run into a problem with, I haven't got the right things to do my job. And on the flip side, you'll have to give handover to the allocated section leader for the next shift. So as you're coming towards the end of your shift as the section leader, you really need to be thinking, okay, so what am I going to be handing over here? Are there any issues? Where are we up to with patients? Can we finish off any patients? So we have to hand over the minimum number of unfinished patients. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you know what I mean by an unfinished patient?
Yeah.
You know, where we've got some outstanding tasks, and if we can just get those sorted so that my handover to the next shift is a bit snappier, and we don't have something getting lost in between shifts. Now, it might sound like, oh, crikey, Jeanette, what are you on about? But actually, it's the section leader's job to make sure that all patients have had the appropriate risk assessments and have got a plan of care of some sort. Bit more obvious in resus or in majors, a bit less obvious in minors, but nevertheless, all the risk assessments have to be done. So what might that be? What sort of risk assessments have you got in your departments?
Risk of falls.
Okay, so there'll be a falls risk assessment. Yeah. And then fix it, put on the non-slip socks. So I don't know what you do in your department. Our first go-to is put on the grippy socks.
Like risk of pressure sores.
Absolutely. Most of us will find that Waterloo is just about impossible because we can't do a must score in A&E. There are other pressure scores are available. Our tissue viability folks asked us to use the Anderson score, which has gone down incredibly well with the staff because it's really quick and easy to do. So, and doesn't really need much teaching. It's fairly straightforwardly obvious. So yeah, absolutely. We want to know if this patient's going to acquire a pressure sore, and we want to know if we're going to have to do some turnings and repositionings and what have you. So falls, pressure sores, yeah. Anything else?
I'm not too sure if it is available in adults, but I would imagine some sort of mental health risk assessment for
Absolutely, absolutely. If you've got a patient who's presented with a mental health issue, absolutely, we need to do that risk assessment. You're quite right. We've got, now I was just thinking, I was about to say we've got that coming up later in the term, but we haven't. We've got mental health stuff coming up on the AFEN program on Tuesday evenings this year. Can't remember just exactly on the timings, but I think it's before Christmas. So absolutely, mental health risk assessments for those patients. Yeah. Falls, pressure sores, mental health risk assessments. Anything else?
Sepsis risk assessment?
You
No?
might do. We've got to be kind of on it with sepsis. So you might want to say, have you considered sepsis? It depends what you've got. They tend to call it a sepsis screening, don't they? So but I suppose that's a risk assessment. So let's go, yeah, screen for sepsis. Yeah.
How about cot sites?
Absolutely. You might want to put cot sides up. Gotta say, I'm a bit old fashioned. If a patient's on a trolley, they've probably got the cot sides up if I'm in charge. With a nice polite explanation to patients that these things are a bit narrower than beds and I ain't having you falling on the floor on my watch. Thanks very much. I wouldn't be overly keen on any patient lying down on a trolley without the cot sides up, but I don't know, how do your departments feel about that? For me, it's more of a, are they fit to sit assessment than do they need lying down? Because if they need lying down, I'm going to have the cot sides up.
Moving and handling?
Say again?
Moving and handling?
Yes, absolutely. There might be some tricky customers. Are we going to need to hoist them? Are we going to need to have 4 or 5 to move them? Or are they perfectly capable of doing it themselves? Yeah. I'm going to kick yourselves in a minute. The COVID one?
Oh, yeah.
COVID screening?
Yeah, red area.
Yeah. Are we going red, amber, green? The infection control risk assessment. I don't know if you have those, but our infection control like us to go through. It's COVID first, obviously, but then there's a whiz through for other stuff. MRSA, C. diff, any other known conditions, and CJD, and what's the other one? TB. Got to ask questions about TB and CPE. What does CPE stand for? Can't remember. It's one of those weird ones from one country and you just don't want to be getting it. So all of those, it's really important your patients have had them. And it's okay to say, well, the nurses know that. But actually, the thing that's going to get us into real trouble is if those risk assessments haven't been done and a risk hasn't been found and hasn't been mitigated. And here's me sitting here with my safeguarding head on going, hang on, I forgot to mention safeguarding. So safeguarding screening has to be done as well. So all of those things need to be done for every patient. And some of them are an eyeball task. I mean, it's fairly obvious if somebody walks in fit and healthy that they're not going to be a manual handling problem. So those are quick and easy, but it will be anything that goes wrong with those risk assessments you need to know about, and you need to know about it before it's going to go wrong. So your instruction to the staff is going to be, right, risk assessments on all your patients. I'll spot check you, and anything that they fail on, I want to know about, so that we've got time to sort out a plan to mitigate that risk. Because I ain't doing the complaint or the datex. Okay, safety checks. Now, what safety checks are you supposed to do as a section leader? Do you know?
To make sure all your equipment's working, your oxygen and suction.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Making sure in my area it's the nursing staff who make sure that all the stock levels are checked and everything is available.
Which is great, but the section leader needs to know it's been done.
Yeah.
And needs to know if anything is missing or anything isn't working. Please don't forget your fridge temperatures. This is something we trip over time and time again. CQC are particularly vigilant about fridge temperatures. So if you've got a drugs fridge or a food fridge in your department, whether that's the patient food fridge or the staff food fridge, make sure it's somebody's job every day to check that temperature. make sure it's all being done, and nothing is used before the safety check. So that will also include things like open the laryngoscopes, make sure the blade's working and the light's working. Make sure the glucose meters have all been calibrated and that you're not using it without it having been calibrated in the last 24 hours. All those sorts of things, because you can't have people treating on stuff that isn't right. Looking at that, just before you think, did she make this all up out of her own head? No, I didn't. Some of this is stuff that's on the MFEN competencies, but I managed to find a competency list for people running a shift, and all these items are from a particular trust in London. Interesting, this one, responsible for the CD keys at all times. So that doesn't mean it can't be another registered nurse that holds them, but a registered nurse must be holding the keys, and the section leader is ultimately responsible for the CD keys. So if you have controlled drugs in your section and you have keys for it rather than a digi lock or a fingerprint lock, then it's your responsibility as section leader to know where they are and that all the drugs are present and correct. Next one is environmental cleanliness. No, you don't have to do the cleaning, but I'm sure you've got those I am clean stickers. You got those ones, the green ones that go,
yep.
Yeah, that bit of kit's been cleaned down and it's ready to use. So that's the job of the section leader. Make sure that that kit is all cleaned, that the trolleys are cleaned, that the chairs are cleaned, that the cubicle is cleaned out between patients. Make sure that the domestics have covered your section on the plan for the day, and that if you've got to do a little bit of wheeler dealing so that the domestics can get into a cubicle and do a full clean, then work with your domestics to achieve that, because it's super important that everywhere is as clean as we can be. It's awful when you get a complaint from a patient about, I went into a cubicle and there was blood spatters on the wall and there was blood spatters on the floor and there was blood on the trolley bed rail, and you think, oh dear me. It isn't really the way to induce trust. Okay, now you talked about allocating staff, so I've got that one as well. It's allocating your available staff to the roles which need to be covered. So you were talking about how you're going to allocate them, and thinking about their skill level and what they can bring to it, and their knowledge level. So can they do IVs? Can they plaster? Can they suture? Can they glue? Can they triage? Do they need supervision for any of those tasks? Are they going to need assessing? Have you got a nurse practitioner available to you? Have you not? Have you got an ACP available to you? Have you not? How can we allocate to make sure that the workload is covered as well as we possibly can? But I also wanted to bring up allocating staff breaks. This is something I'm going to come back to nearer to Christmas in a big way. But I wanted to discuss about the breaks. When do you go to break? If you're the section leader, when do you go to break?
Just after you've ensured that the staff have all had their breaks.
Okay, that is a very typical answer to get to that question. You go after everybody else. That's one way of looking at it. Okay. Have you thought about the timing of any of these breaks?
I suppose it's important to keep the same times every day, although it is difficult, because once, like if you have 3 different sets of breaks for like majors, if the first lot of people are going later, it's such a backlog to everyone else, and then some people end up not getting a break. And you could say, oh, we'll wait till it's a bit quieter, but the ED's never quiet. You just have to go.
So Raj said right at the beginning, when I said, what do staff need to do their job? One of the things she said was they need to be fit and healthy. They need to be physically and mentally well enough. And one of the biggest things you can do as a shift leader is organize the workload so that everybody gets a break. Now, when we do these lectures, I always call it a fluid balance break, and it's getting to be a bit of a joke now. A fluid balance break, okay, input, output, or input, output, whichever order you like to do it. But that's really, really important. I mean, how many times do you hear staff say that they didn't even get time to go to the toilet? I mean, that is just shocking, really. And if you heard about that from outside, you know, some people work in, well, people work in all sorts of environments, and when they hear that there wasn't time to go to the toilet, they think that's inhuman. I've got to say, I do too. But there's something about how you organize yourselves that enables you to deal with that. And some of that self-discipline, you know, if you're sent on a break, go to the loo, get a drink, make those your priorities, so that if you happen to be called back from your break because something goes belly up, at least you've got an empty bladder, and at least you've had a quick drink of some sort. So that's important. But actually you need some rest, and you need some sugar, so to speak. Whoops, the daisy, I've gone too far. There we are, coming up to the break. You need some food, you need fuel, otherwise you won't keep going. And as a general rule, people don't do well after 4 hours. So as a general rule, you need to get people to break before you get to 4 hours. Now, I've also said take your own break, and I've also said that one way of doing it is to wait for everybody else. I'm going to challenge you and say, I'd like you to try going to break first. Why might I want you to go to break before the rest of the staff?
I suppose if you've had a drink and you've been to the bathroom, your mental health and your own comfort is there to then manage everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Raj, have you any thoughts? Why would I send you to break first? Why would I say organize your own break to be the first one? Okay, maybe she's struggling with connection there. So I learned this one a long time ago, and it's a funny old thing. I used to do exactly what you suggested, Kate. I would prioritize all my staff, and I'd send them to break first, and I'd go last. Problem with that, certainly on the late shift. So, because in my day back in the day we didn't do 12-hour shifts every time. But in the evening, if you went last, actually what happened was you went to break just as all the patients were being moved, because moves up to wards happen at certain times. And if you watch, there are certain times in the day, it's very, very predictable when the moves, the admissions will be done. And if you go to break at the time of all the admissions and the moves, you lose control over your section very quickly, or your shift. So on one count, you need to go first, because you need to time your break to be before all the moves. So I'll give you a clue. That's likely to be about 11 o'clock in the morning. And it's likely to be about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That feels ridiculously early to eat, but it's not about when you want to eat. It's about what's the optimum time so that you can go and you can eat and you're refueled and you're fresh and ready to go for the bit that's going to be hard slog. The second reason I want you to go first is because if you go first, everybody else will follow you. Leading isn't just about trying harder. It's about getting people to follow you. And if you set the example of taking a break, it gives them tacit permission to do the same. So they will take a break and they will think, well, if the person in charge can do it, I can do it. And then the third thing I'm going to say about breaks is please time them. It's really easy to plan breaks in advance, and it gives everybody a chance to go if you decide what time the breaks are going to be. So, for example, and really these are examples, you don't have to do it this way, but let's just say, for example, you come on shift at 7:30 in the morning. Certainly you need to be starting, you need to look at whether you're doing 12-hour shifts or short shifts or what. But if you're going to be giving people a coffee break or a breakfast break or whatever they prefer, then that needs to be done and dusted by 10. And lunch breaks need to start by 11:30. And you're on the first of everything. Because if you go first, we're done. And you have to be really punctual about coming back so the next person goes. It only takes a little while, and then you become the predictable person, the consistent person who, right, if I'm on with her, I've got to take my break. If I'm on with him, I better be sorted, and it's no good arguing about my breaks at such and such, I'll go later. Nurses have a tendency to martyrdom. It does nobody any favours if you don't take your break when it's allocated. Okay? Sermon over. So looking at all of those things that a section leader is doing and is responsible for, are those things that you have been doing, or if you're not yet a band 6 or a CNM, are they things that you see that person doing and you didn't realize you had to do when you went into the role?
Yeah, I've been doing quite a lot of them. The page is obviously a very small area, although very busy compared to the rest of the department. There's usually only 2 PEDS nurses on, so it can often be very difficult. It's very interesting that you said about staff breaks, because there is only 2 of us and it was so busy. You keep saying, oh yeah, we'll go soon, and then before you know it, you haven't had your lunch and it's tea time.
Now, I'm going to challenge you on that, because I know when children come into a department, your peak time is we're going to pop down the hospital, and we're going to do that after Dad gets home.
Yeah.
So the way it works is they go home from school, they know there's an issue after school, but they go home, they all have tea, wait for Dad, maybe have tea with Dad, and then they pop down the hospital as a unit. Now, you can't do that in COVID times, so you end up with just the one parent with the child. Great, thins out your crowding, but you still find that you've got the child too late at night, and you've got them all having the same idea. They all arrive at the same time, and then they all get cranky, and they all stay up too late when they should be in bed. Am I right?
Absolutely.
It's the same all the world over. So you know that in PEDS, it's going to be relatively easygoing in the morning. It won't be quiet, but it will be steady.
Yeah.
So then you've got to think about, right, so I know that in PEDS, the pattern will be very easy in the morning and then picks up a little bit around lunch, nothing drastic. But once we hit the after school time, we're off. And we also know it's going to be fairly busy the weekend days. But again, it will pattern more or less the same. There won't be a big influx in the morning of children. So you know that if you've got stuff to do, if you're on in the morning actually in PEDS, you could get all this stuff on the screen done
Mhm.
in the morning on PEDS, couldn't you?
Yep.
All of that, therefore, more job in PEDS. It's not the same elsewhere, but in PEDS, it absolutely is. And depending on what shift pattern you're working, you simply bunk your breaks early. So are there always two of you on?
Yeah.
So you're never going to go to break together because you don't want to leave the place without a nurse.
Mhm.
Are you working 12-hour shifts or short shifts?
12-hour shifts.
So what time do you start and finish?
So there's two different ones. One nurse starts from 7:30 to 8:30 at night, and then the other nurse comes in at 10 to 10. So,
Right. 10 till 10.
yeah.
Right. So actually that's fairly straightforward, isn't it? I mean, apart from the fact you like to have a bit of a chin wag,
Yeah.
actually, the first nurse who's been on since 7:30 goes to break when the second one gets in,
Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah.
right? And you probably need to think really carefully about whether that's a substantial meal break. I would argue that there's a case for having it feels like a very early lunch, so just think of it as a brunch instead. There's a case for going at about 10:30 and having a half-hour break then and making it a brunch.
Mhm.
You know, go down the canteen if you want to, if you know, and get the bacon, egg and beans and whatever else you like. And you know, then once you've had that, you'll keep going for quite a long time, won't you?
Yeah.
Now, if that's not your type of food, fine, doesn't matter. But I'm only using that as an example because
Mhm.
it doesn't feel quite like lunchtime food, but you need to think about what sort of food. So on a personal level, as an individual, you need to plan what food you're going to have depending on what shift you're doing.
Yeah.
And you need to plan to have it with you or the means to get it with you. Now, at 10:30 in the morning on PEDS, in all likelihood, you have got time to go to the canteen,
Yeah.
depending on how far away your canteen is. So taking money to go and buy food might work on that 7:30 to 8 shift, 8:30 shift. But you could have your kind of big, well, it's only a half-hour break then. And then you probably need to have your second break somewhere around about picking up from school time. I know that might sound bonkers, but the one place you can guarantee parents are at 3 p.m. is near a school gate. So they won't be in your department.
Yeah.
Because the ones you've got will be desperate to get to the school, and the ones that are at the school haven't reached you yet.
Yeah.
So you won't have many people at 3 p.m. So that would be another good place to have a break. And you could probably, the 7:30 person could probably get through very, very comfortably, having a break at 10:30 and another break about 3 o'clock.
Mhm.
Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now your 10 till 10, slightly trickier, but I reckon, because they're not going to want to break straight away by any stretch of the imagination, but I reckon they could comfortably have a break somewhere between midday and 3 o'clock. There will be a spot there, and you know your department better than I do, but there'll be a spot somewhere between 12 and 3
Mhm.
where it'd be a really good time, and play about with the times. But then once you've decided what the times are, they go up on the board. And who's taking the 10:30 right, you're on 7:30 shift, so you're taking the 10:30 and 3 p.m. break. Right, that's you. And I'm on the 10 till 10, so I'll be having my break at, let's say for the sake of argument, 1:30, because that gives us a bit of doubling up time. And then we've got to find a second break for the 10 till 10 person. Now there'll be a lull somewhere. Have a look, just have a look at it, observe it for a day or two. They've got to go to break before the first person goes off at 8:30. That's quite clear.
Mhm.
So you might be wanting to have a break. Now let's see, what time is kids' tea time? It's probably about 5:30, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that might be the time to go, because you might then have got over your after school crowd, which won't be a big one.
Mhm.
You won't yet have had your after tea crowd. So if you plan that and just have a little play around with it, because you won't get it right first time, but once you've got those breaks that work, then you stick to them. Whether you're hungry or not, you stick to them and you go. And then you've got a pattern to your shift. You've got your fixed points of how we're going to pivot around this. And you know that neither of you will go more than 4 hours without eating. And watch how that affects your temper, your ability to think, and your ability to just get the job done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So we do tend to be martyrs. We tend to put ourselves last. But if you have that conversation and you plan it in advance and then you stick to the plan, you'd be surprised what a difference it will make to you.
Great.
Okay. Taking my own advice, we're now going to have the fluid balance break of the evening. So I'm going to tell you to get up, stretch, go to the loo, get yourselves a drink, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Okay?
Great. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to go? Everybody ready to go? Not quite yet. Okay, time to get underway again. So, our first question. Now we've done what's the section leader doing? What's the shift leader doing? So the section leader is obviously going to get involved in some clinical care at various points once they've made sure that that everything is covered that needs to be covered from a section leader point of view. What's a shift leader doing? Again, more of my colleagues who have kindly posed and given consent and all that sort of thing.
Allocate staff to the rest of the department.
Sorry, what with the rest of the department?
Allocating staff.
Yes, absolutely. So they're the ones who will allocate to sections, aren't they?
Yeah.
They will send you off to your peds area. Yeah. What else will they do?
They deal with any issues that are happening in the department.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What sorts of things did you have in mind?
So they would escalate if there was any issues, be able to escalate to the person above them.
Uh-huh. So this here's my shift lead here with her duty matron doing the let's cover off the issues that are bothering me this evening. Yep. Shall I help you out? Lots and lots of boxes to come. Oh my goodness, did they really do all this? So my colleague here is doing one of the shift leader jobs. What's she doing? What's she doing in that picture? So that's the first job. She's checking the staffing for the next 24 hours. It doesn't go down very well with the matron who's on or the nursing officer or whatever you call your next level up. It doesn't go down very well with them if they get called for last minute cover because you didn't check and you hadn't moved stuff around. So the shift leader's job is to make sure, and it might sound a bit odd, but it's one of their first jobs of the shift. It's go and look, make sure everybody's allocated, then go and look at the staffing for the next 24 hours and make sure that your staff that you're expecting are going to come in, or that if you don't anticipate they'll be in, that you have a plan for how you're going to staff it. Our department needs 20 staff on each shift. So you find one day, as they did last week, you're down to 10. It's not a great plan, and you need that plan sorted out before the shift that's only got 10 staff on starts. Okay. I don't fancy that job, I have to say. It's always the one that I swerved, that one, doing the off duty. But nevertheless, if you're in charge of the shift, That is your first task once the shift's underway. Then the next task you'll have is to complete any sickness returns. So you may be oblivious of this other than when you're doing it yourself. So you'll know that the sickness policy requires that you to ring a certain point if you're off sick and make sure that certain person named role is aware. In my department, it's the shift leader has to be told, and that you ring the number for the shift leader and you report your sickness to them. So they will need to complete any sickness returns for anyone who has rung in sick for the current shift or subsequent shifts that they know about, so that they're ready to make sure that the next shift leader can sort that out and cover for it if necessary. Now, on the flip side of sickness returns, the shift leader needs to do return to work interviews. So if you've got someone who's been off shift or off sick, let's just say for the sake of argument, because it's nice and straightforward, you've got someone who was off with a broken wrist. Okay, now it's a nice legitimate reason to be at work, and you're absolutely categorically not driving with a broken wrist in a plaster, and you are not going to be working on the floor for 6 weeks. So it's nice and straightforward. It's a big block of sickness, but it's got to be done. So your organisation will have a sickness policy that says what has to be put on the sickness return when you call in sick and what has to be done when you return from sick. So the shift leader will need to speak to anyone returning from sick that day. It doesn't happen every day, obviously, and just say, okay, you're back from off sick. What was the matter? How have you been, etc. And then your sickness absence policy in your organisation will dictate what happens next. So some people will be on some sort of sickness report. Some people will be required to have an occupational health check. Some won't. Some will be on phased returns. So they'll be following the sickness absence policy. And the first step of that, the first 2 steps of that are the sickness return and the return to work interview. And the earlier you do that in the shift, the better. You often find actually that the shift leader that does this is the one on the morning rather than the one on covering the afternoon or the night. Sit reps. You familiar with sit reps? Does that mean anything to you?
No.
No?
Is the
No, that's fine.
Is the shift leader the same as shift management?
Yes.
Or is it...
I'm using a generic term of shift leader, the person who's in charge of the whole shift of the whole department.
Okay.
Okay. That might be in my department, that would be one of the band 7s. It would never be anyone but a band 7 in my department. But we've several band 7s, so it won't be the same person every day. And if there's more than one band 7 on duty, one of them might section lead rather than shift lead. So you saw the same band 7 in a couple of my pictures. One she was section leading, another one she was shift leading. So sit reps just is short management speak for situation report. Okay, bit of a military term, sit rep, and what you're required to do is report in certain figures. So the shift leader, unbeknownst to you clearly, is completing the sit rep. And different organizations will do it different ways. In some organizations, there will be an automatic harvest of the numbers at a certain point by the IT systems. And you'll just have to add in some narrative that says there was a bit of a bulk load of ambulances, you know, they came as an embolus, the ambulances, there's 6 of them all in one go. Or we've had no beds for 12 hours, so we've got a backlog waiting for beds. Or you might need to say that this particular patient has been in the resuscitation room for over 10 hours because they came in hypothermic and arrested, and actually they're still on the auto pulse, and we've warmed them up, and until we've got them warm and we've gone through the cycles enough times, we're not going to be able to say they're fit enough to leave resus and go elsewhere, and there isn't anywhere else that's going to be able to manage doing all of that. so they're staying in recess. In other organisations, the sit rep has to be populated by the A&E shift leader. So in my organisation, the shift leader will have a sit rep up. It's a template form that's on the computer. So one of the tabs they'll have open is the sit rep, and that at set times of the day, they are required to look at what's in the department and fill that in. So it'd be, how many patients have you got overall? How many of those are for medicine? How many are for surgery? How many are children? How many patients have you got doing nothing other than waiting for a bed? How many patients have you got without a decision? So are they coming? Are they going? Are they, you know, what? How many patients have you got waiting to be seen? And then in the site management offices or operations center, or whatever you call your hospital control center, those sit reps will go into the wider hospital rep that senior management are looking at, so that they can spot, preempt, try and tackle any problems as they come up. And sit reps, usually you'll find that site management are pulled together for a meeting somewhere around about 8 o'clock in the morning. So most managers, and that will be nurse managers and general managers and directors of divisions and what have you, will be pulled into a sit rep meeting at about 8 o'clock at night. They'll probably do another one about 11 o'clock in the morning, another one early afternoon, and another one about 4:30, and then there'll be one somewhere towards the end of the day shift of general managers, and the day shift of general managers generally change over around 8 p.m. So those sit reps have to be populated by the shift leader, and an explanation given for anything that looks a bit odd or a bit out of kilter. So when you think that the shift leader's just staring at the computer all day, you don't want to know how much telling off they would get if their sit rep arrives late. So just cut them a bit of slack and maybe find out what time their sit reps are due, and that's the time not to disturb them and let them get it done. And then they're probably going to go for a break after the sit rep's done. The shift leader also will probably be the person who takes the pre-alerts from the ambulance service. An awful lot of departments will put the bat phone next to the nurse coordinator's position, and the nurse coordinator will often be the person who answers the bat phone. There's a variety of reasons for doing that. The main one being that actually that's the person who needs to start juggling things around and making room for, and it isn't the nurse in recess who needs to know about the pre-alert, it's the nurse in charge who will then decide how long have we got and where are we going to put this patient. Might not have to go to recess. It might be, for example, if it's a query stroke, you might have a pit stop type arrangement for those, where you're going to pause briefly, let senior doctor look at the patient, and then go straight to CT. So that pre-alert might actually be about, oh, hang on, all I have to do is let CT know not to take their next patient in, so that we can go straight in. And I need to grab the senior doctor, who I can probably free up in 10 minutes. If I give them notice now, we stand there, do the pit stop thing, and then the patient goes to CT. Bit of a problem if they don't go to CT because we haven't got space, but that certainly would be a decision that doesn't affect the nurse in recess for a bit. So that's why you would go with that decision making. Another shift leader job is ordering stock. Now, most departments have someone dedicated to doing the ordering. You will find that a lot of people do top up ordering. So if you go into your stock room, you'll find barcodes and numbers on every box that's got stock in it. And that's because your senior shift leaders that normally shift lead, your band 7s, your CNMs, I can't remember, it's 1 or 2, always get this wrong. They will have decided stock levels for every single item that you use. And and your stores people possibly come in and the roads count you've got and order to top up, but there'll be some exceptional items that doesn't happen with, and there'll be some drugs that doesn't happen with. So obviously ordering the CDs is going to be a shift leader job, or delegated by them to someone else to make sure it gets done. And most shift leaders run a shopping list of some sort that will be the section leaders alerted them to issues that can't be dealt with the top-up stores or by the pharmacy top-up that comes on a daily basis, or it's going to be an urgent item or an awkward item or something. So most shift leaders you'll find will have a shopping list running. You just need to find out what the criteria are for getting onto it. Now, next one will be the shift leader needs to preempt complaints happening. Any ideas what people complain about?
Waiting time.
Absolutely, they do. Always complaining about waiting time. Right. What can you do as a shift leader to preempt that complaint?
Keep them updated and keep communicating with them and telling them. As I think of people, as long as they have the information, it can kind of stop them nearly from complaining if they know. It's when patients are sitting for a long time and don't know what's happening.
Yeah. So it's, you know how you said about when you're looking to try and get a break, you think we'll go. Oh, hang on, we've missed it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same thing happens with telling people and updating them. You can end up missing it because you get all kind of sucked into whatever it is you're doing, and you lose your focus. So you actually, as a shift leader, have to kind of pre-plan walkabouts. So you can't stay absolutely glued to your workstation. You have to pre-plan to every hour or so, take a bit of a wander around each area and have a chat to patients, have a chat to relatives. I don't mean an in-depth, let's go and shake hands and find out how they are doing. But a general smile and hello, how everything all right? You seem to have been waiting a long time. Is everything underway? You know what's going on, what's happening? Quick chat to the staff. Everything all right? Section leader, we're all right here. Anyone waiting too long? Anything that's you're stuck with? Any barriers to getting on with the next step that I can help you with? Right, then out to the subweight. You've all got a subweight somewhere where you put patients who've come back from X-ray. Everybody all right in here? Everybody had their X-ray, waiting for their treatment, waiting for results. Okay. Anything else we need to worry about? No. Okay. Section leader that's covering the subweight. We're happy with everybody in here. Nobody giving us any cause for concern. Lovely. Righty-ho. Next section, and then out to the waiting room. Just to say, everybody all right out here? Terribly sorry. I know it takes a long time, but we don't have any space inside at the moment. And it's very grim just sitting here. Do feel free to get up and go and have a wander around. Just let the receptionist know if you're going to go and have a wander around, and then let them know when you come back. Because sometimes just going and stretching your legs can help. Or, did the triage nurse tell you whether you could eat or drink? Because if you can eat or drink and you want to drink, do please feel free, and that's absolutely fine. Quick check of the toilets in the waiting rooms so that you know whether there's any issues that need the cleaner to deal with, because patients will go into a toilet and go, "Ooh, I'm not using that," if there's a problem. But if you've gone and checked, you can be on it quite quickly. And a walk round like that every hour will have you, it doesn't take long. And if you can't manage the whole department because of the size of it every hour, well, then just do a section every hour, but don't do the same section each hour. And just being across it make a big difference. And if you know there's going to be a problem, so I don't know, it's a brilliant moment when you're the shift leader and the major incident gets called in, and you walk out to the waiting room. You go, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement to make. Right, we've had a major incident called, and I'm very sorry, but I must ask you all to go home now." you can go to your GP, or you could go to, and then you can list off minor injury units or what have you. If you really think you need to stay here, that's okay, but please understand that the major incident patients will come first until we know what we've got. And so your waiting time may increase quite a lot. Now, you might think you're being a bit unreasonable there, Jeanette. I don't think they'll do it because they're really feisty, the waiting room. But if you have the chance ever to talk to anyone, particularly from Manchester, I've spoken to several people who were there and worked in their department when the Manchester bomb went off. And they all say, you would not believe it. We had 56 people in the waiting room. Within an hour, they'd all gone. We had no beds in the hospital, but within an hour, we'd freed up enough. And they'd got patients volunteering to get out of bed and go home early because they'd heard there was a problem. Patients in the A&E department just simply said, it's fine, we're going, we'll come back tomorrow or afterwards. I've had this for 3 days already, it can wait another day. This is too much of a problem for you. And so actually the departments all ended up with a nice lull before all the patients started coming in. So it is surprising how a quick chat to the waiting room will help. The day I got in and I was in charge, and it was snowy, and there was me and 2 other staff, and I thought this is going to go well. But actually, quick chat with the waiting room on the challenges of getting staff in during the snow, and we were grand. And actually, we had no complaints at all that shift because everybody thought it was great. Another way of doing it, we were doing A&E Live, which is the Twitter campaign that happens on the first Tuesday in January, and at some point in June that I forget. And one of those occasions we were having a real problem, simply with too many people, and we had got no space. So we just put a Twitter message out that said, really sorry, folks, having a terrible time in A&E, too many people. If you really must come, please just bring one person with you. Please make sure you come equipped for a long stay. So bring supplies and a book. Well, blow me if people didn't come with picnics and their knitting and their books. And we never had a squeak out of anyone all for a whole 24-hour period, because they'd been warned, they came equipped. And they were quite prepared to settle in for a long wait, and it wasn't a problem. So those sort of things, it really doesn't take much doing, but that's the shift leader's responsibility. Get out of your staff's way while they do their job. Make sure that things aren't going to be a problem. The shift leader needs to preempt adverse incidents. How can they do that? So adverse incidents are the things that will cause an incident report or a DATEX, depending on which system you use. How can we preempt adverse incidents?
Like risk assessing, if you have maybe someone who's intoxicated or potentially violent in the department.
Absolutely. What's my plan? And I would even challenge you and say, if you know you're coming on shift and you're going to be in charge, what's your plan if that happens? Because you can almost guarantee there'll be someone intoxicated at some point during a 24-hour period, if not a 12-hour period. So what's your plan for identifying that person and then making sure they're contained so that they can't hurt anybody else, they can't hurt any patients, and they can't hurt any staff? What's your plan? Okay.
So know where you're going to put them in the department?
Yeah, know where you're going to put them. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say, you know what's going to come in. You know what sort of mix comes in. It happens every single day or every single week. It happens very, very predictably. It's difficult sometimes to see that when you're just treating the next patient and the next patient and the next patient. But when you pull back a little bit and you take a wider view of the department and you start looking at where do our numbers go in and go down and what have you, actually, I can tell you, for example, that very little will happen in the morning in terms of admissions with adult patients. Why not? Because the admission wards haven't finished their ward rounds. So they're working on their post-take ward rounds, which don't start till 8 o'clock. 7:30 if you're lucky, but it's usually 8 o'clock. So you won't have anybody move out of the admissions wards and go home or to discharge waiting lounges or whatever, probably till about 11 o'clock. So you're not actually going to have any movement. So if you've got a full department when you come onto the early shift, your first adverse incident is, right, I got to free up a bed, because at any point the pre-alert might go and I need to have a plan for how I'm going to have a free trolley for that pre-alert. And then your second plan is, right, I know that I'm not going to get things moving before then, but just at the point that beds start coming up, I'm going to start house calls and sending patients in, and the ambulances start bringing them from about 11:30, 12. So I know that it's going to be a very tight turnaround between starting to move patients out towards and getting patients in from GPs who've said, just call an ambulance because you've got whatever. You can time those things, and you know that about 2 o'clock you're going to have a bit of a confluence of unpleasantness. You're going to have too many patients arriving, not enough patients departing. You're going to be really short of bed. That'd be fabulous time for a major incident, wouldn't it? So what happened? What would I do? What's my major incident plan? What am I going to do if that happens? And there's so many things you can predict will happen. You just have to have the plan ready in advance. Don't think you have to react to everything on the hoof. You don't. You can absolutely work out. So like with the children, you know when they're going to come. We're going to have an adverse incident. We're going to have complaints if we've got all those kids cranky, needing to go to bed, and the parents are getting cranky as well. But actually, with a little planning, we can contain that, and we can have this going like clockwork. And yes, they might bunch up a bit, but actually we can have it going like clockwork without too much of a difficulty, provided we've got a bit of a plan in advance. And absolutely the same thing applies when the whole shift, not just the area. Okay, so the last thing I've got here, I mean, there's other things a shift leader needs to do as well, but these are the biggies. So the next one is liaising with site and senior management. So site management will always liaise first with the nurse in charge of A&E, and the nurse in charge of A&E is on all the big plans. So what you don't see are the management on call rotas that go out all the time. And on those management on call rotas, they will name the nurse in charge of the shift for A&E, and they will name the consultant in charge of the shift for A&E. And so the nurse in charge will be liaising with site management to make sure that there's any issues particularly that aren't covered off in the narrative of the sit rep, that site management are aware of the constraint or the additional capacity. It's okay, I'm not pushed just at the moment. Might change within the hour, but I'm all right at the moment. So if you could focus on the back end or whatever it is, or get that elective in, or get off my back anyway and let me get on with my job would be good. And with senior management, senior management are likely to toddle in, and they do like to turn up when it's looking a bit difficult. Now, what's your plan for dealing with the director of nursing or chief nurse, whatever you call them, when they turn up in your department when it's all going belly up and they say, I've come to help? What do you ask that chief nurse, or indeed your chief executive or your medical director, when they rock up in the department? What's your plan for how you use them? Any thoughts?
Like if the department is extremely busy, you're hoping maybe that they'll go on diver to another hospital. I suppose, ask patients in the waiting area who that isn't an emergency, you know, if they can come back, try and get more staff.
Mm-hmm. You could ask them to do that. It's always a good PR thing to get the director of nursing to go talk to patients. Tell you what's a really good use of perhaps the director of nursing, and that's, have you got a patient who's dying or very confused, who could do with a person sitting talking to them or sitting just being with them? That would be a really good use of an executive's time, because they can't do anything for you. So they can either be a very expensive porter, which is slightly pointless, or you could use them where you need a one-to-one. And our executives decided they were all going to be terribly helpful and they were all going to arrive at the same time. Jeepers, was that a nuisance. So we had to take them aside and say, really, it's not helpful. When it's really bad, just one of you is enough. Thank you very much. Don't all come. And certainly don't come all come at the same time. It really, really doesn't help, because what happens is they start asking the shift leader, where do I find this? How can I do that? So it just creates a bigger job for the shift leader, makes them more stressed. So keeping senior management happy, informed, and usefully employed is the trick there. So that you have a plan for what will I ask one of the board to do if they turn up. Remembering that usually the only people on your executive who are clinical are your chief nurse and your medical director. Okay, the others will not be clinicians, so you will need to have a think about what you do if they turn up. Having your chief executive pushing someone to X-ray is great, but is that the most useful thing that chief exec could be doing? Or would it be better if the chief executive was talking to their opposite number in your community organisation, for example, to see what could be done to pull patients through to community hospitals? So it just needs a bit of thinking through and giving them a job to do. I'd say the same about relatives as well. Give relatives a job to do. Get them to fold the clothes, fetch this, contact so and so. If people feel useful and it's a job you don't then need to do, then that's great. So have a plan for how to use senior people when they turn up and say hello, and preempt the problem they will find. Senior people will always find you're out of hand sanitizer. So quite a good idea at the beginning of your shift to go and check the hand sanitizers as you do your lap of the place, and check that you're not out of hand sanitizer. CQC are always a bit hot on hand sanitizer as well, so well worth on 2 scores, making sure that you're sorted on that. Seems a bit small, but it's the sort of thing that they will pick up on. Okay, so those are all your tasks. Now, we talked about how to manage time in relation to breaks, so we've thought about that, but now we need to think about other constraint times. So I feel we've covered off staff breaks out of those things, so we'll park that one. What are we going to do? We've got a triage talking. So what's the plan? Say that again, sorry?
It's getting frozen.
You're getting, am I freezing?
The system is
or is
getting
that you?
frozen. No,
Okay.
I think my tab is getting.
Is it you?
Yeah.
Is it you or is it me?
Well, it's okay on my end.
Okay, your end. It might just be your end, right? We'll press on and hope for the best.
Yeah, thanks.
So we've got 15 minutes to triage time. Now that doesn't always just go as swiftly as one would like, or as smoothly. So what can we do if we see that those triage times are starting to slip?
You could open a second triage room.
You could. Absolutely. Excellent idea. Now, as you work in a PEDS area, you may well have a PEDS triage section. Yeah. So I know in my department, in the PEDS section, they have one cubicle which is dedicated to triage. And then the adults and the children are triaged separately.
Yeah.
So that's quite a good way. So if we're piling up with adults, then we'll have to open a second adults room, or if we're piling up with kids, we'll have to open a second kids triage option. So have you thought through how you will achieve that and when, so that that's not something you come to as a crisis?
Mm-hmm.
You're watching those triage times. Then the next timing thing you've got is each triage category has got a target time. Now, I don't know how your IT does it, but our IT has different colors. So there's different color switches as you go past each hour. I think we're green up until about 2 hours, and then it changes to amber, and then it goes red, and then it goes purple if you breach the 4 hours. So there's also a color against the triage target, and you can see when you're coming up to the time. So different departments will do it different ways, and it really doesn't matter how your department does it, so long as you're clear that your triage times are going to be immediate for one, and if you have 2 category 1s in a day, you're having a bad day. Your category 2s have to be seen within 10 minutes, so nearly as good as straight away, really. You shouldn't have too many of those a day. Your category 3s or yellow have to be seen within an hour. Bulk of your majors patients will be in that category, and so actually it's about watching with the majors patients how many numbers you're building up to, and can we reprioritize medical break times or medical shift times to match up with those rising numbers of category 3s, so that we keep on top of it. There's definitely, within medical circles in emergency care, they're really looking hard at how we make sure we get patients seen within the triage category timings. And they're trying all sorts of different ways of doing it. So you'll find that a lot of places are now doing something that is equivalent to a Formula One pit stop, so that you get senior eyes on quite quickly, so that it's not so much of a nurse triage and then the patient sits around waiting for the doctor, but more of a doctor triage that can then progress a little bit quicker, which knocks that triage time on the head. And then as the shift leader, what are your sit rep times? What times have you got to get that sit rep completed for site management? Because it has to be done by that time. There isn't a discussion about it. It has to be done, because this is about making sure the rest of the organisation knows where you're up to and what you're dealing with, and whether you're going to need help, or you're going to need slack cut, or you're going to need the transfer team sent down, or whatever. And then overall, you've got a 4-hour target on all your patients. So have you, as shift leader, got a clear idea where your holdups are and what's causing any blockages to achieving that 4-hour target to keep people moving through? Because if you're managing to work to the 4-hour target and you're getting people out in a timely fashion, then everyone will feel it's been a good shift, because the patients won't have waited at any particular point for any length of time. You'll have got treatments and what have you dealt with in a reasonably comfortable time frame, and the patients will be out. They know all these times, they know about the 15 minutes, they know about the 4-hour, because it's all in government documentation, and it's regularly put on the front pages of the media. So they're very conscious of it, and you've got to be conscious of it if you're the shift leader, and keep that in your mind and keep checking that we're doing all right with our times and everything's moving and nothing's got stuck. Now, you've got some fixed points in your day that you really need to work with. So obviously there's the shift start, and I haven't really put a lot in here. I could have made this slide 3 times as big, but I don't think I need to teach Granny to suck eggs. I just need to give you a general idea, and then you can put in some interim points yourselves. So your shift starts and you get a handover from the previous shift leader. Great. There's going to be a sit rep somewhere around about there. So that's a priority task. You're going to have to allocate staff. That's a priority task, needs to be done nice and quickly so that handover is sorted. And some places allocate the staff in the staff room before they go onto the floor and see what's what. And then certainly if it's the morning, there'll be your routine tasks, the checking, the monitoring, you're making sure everything's as it needs to be. Less easy to do if you happen to be coming on at 2, 3 o'clock or taking over shift leading at that point, and less easy to do if you're coming on to shift lead overnight. And then depending on how your department works, you may find you have huddles. They're variously described as pause points or stand-up meetings or safety huddles or safety briefing or something like that. The point of them is that they are stand-up meetings. They take no longer than 10 minutes. And really it's you as the shift leader, perhaps definitely the consultant in charge in our department, rather grandly known as the EPIC consultant or just the EPIC. And just taking that time, pause at set pre-agreed times to go, right, where are we up to? How are we doing? Where's the blockages? Where's the slower bit? Where's the stuck point? Where's the complicated patient? And just do that status check. Make sure you've got a balance. Who's in red? Who's in green? Have we got enough doctors? Have we got enough nurses? Who's taken that patient? Who the devil's that member of staff? What are they doing here? And that's usually just a bit before a sit rep's due, so that the sit rep can be completed at the end of the huddle, and make sure that's all delivered in. And then after a huddle, there's going to be actions to take or reactions to the situation, and you might need to just do a bit of a regroup, a reshuffle of staff, or a swap round of breaks or something of that nature. And you'll have, if you're in charge for a whole 12 hours, and I don't recommend that, it's well worth not being the shift leader for full 12 hours. That can be a bit much. But there's likely to be more than one huddle. And then at some point your shift will finish. And before your shift finishes, you need to know what time that's going to be. You don't meander up to it. You work out where it's going to be, and you make sure you've got a status check sorted. You can account for all the patients, what's not necessarily everything that's wrong with every single person, but you can account for all of the patients, where they're up to, and there's a bit of a wash up going on in each section, so that all the unfinished patients, as we're coming up to shift finish, are getting finished off to go, so that the next shift take over the minimum number of patients with unfinished tasks outstanding. And then you prep your handover for the next shift, so that they're very clear. Some shift leaders will also be required to write a shift report. They're usually the big A4 desk diaries, and there'll be a variety of things written in there. Often things like, we had the following deaths, we had the following sickness, we had a major incident, or we didn't, or cubicle 13 needs a full decontam because we had, I don't know what, something nasty in there that wasn't COVID, but it was still nasty. Perhaps we had that unpleasant intoxicated patient that decided to make the cubicle look unpleasant. So you have all that written down, ready to go. And those are your fixed points that you have to work to. So it doesn't just drift around, it works to those fixed points as we go through. Okay, so the end of the shift, we're all done. Have you got your reports written? Is the next shift briefed on everything? That's not just the handover, but it's briefing on what you know is coming up in the next 12 hours or so, not just handing over what's currently there. Do you debrief your shift? Many departments will do a shift debrief afterwards. So there'll be an expectation that staff all go into the staff room or into the staff changing area or whatever it is, or possibly into the seminar room, and just right, how was that shift for you? Any issues, anything that was particular trouble, anything you did really well? Okay, great. Thank you all for your time and energy. Go home, eat, sleep, and come back to battle tomorrow. Make sure you know what shift you're supposed to be on tomorrow and go home. And the aim of the game is to go home on time, not to stay late. You might occasionally have to stay late or wish to stay late because you want to see a patient through who's about to leave. But actually, as shift leader, again, you need to be leading from the front on this and going home as on time as you can possibly achieve. Okay, and I think that brings us up on time to the end. So that's your QR code. So if you want to cam scan that, it will connect you through to the evaluation form. And when you filled in the evaluation form and submitted, about 10 minutes later, you'll get a CPD certificate via email, which so I know some managers are giving you time back for. So if you produce that and your manager's doing the time back thing, that will enable you to get that time back. Does anyone have, while I leave that code up, does anyone have any questions or any any questions about what we've gone through this evening, about how we organise our workload as the person in charge?
That was great, it was really interesting.
Oh, good. So now I'm going to ask you, and my staff would tell you, oh, she always asks this, pick out one thing that that really made you stop and think and go, you know what, I'm going to try that.
Definitely the breaks thing.
The breaks.
Yeah, I think because we usually, as I said, just go when it's a little bit quieter, and then often you do miss it. But I think if we had set breaks and tried as much as possible to stick to them, yeah,
it will make a big difference
yeah,
to how you all feel. And instead of coming out feeling completely drained and ragged, you'll come out going, that was a good shift, enjoyed that.
yeah,
and that's quite a big deal, actually. It's quite a big deal to be able to walk out going, yeah, that was great. Okay, so the next MFEN session, that's for shift leaders and co, or aspiring shift leaders, that isn't next week. So next week is the first week of the month. So the first Thursday in the month is the monthly webinar. I've seen a link for that looks like it's going to be about thoracostomy. So it's really quite interesting, very clinically focused, and a little bit left field, just to be different and interesting. So the next MFEN lecture will be the week after that, and that's going to be about organising the workload of others, and that's going to be led by Ruth Cave from Nottingham University Hospitals. So thank you ever so much for staying this evening and participating, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time for our next focused on the shift leader lecture, but do by all means feel free to join the monthly webinar next Thursday. Good night.
great night.